Before Election Day 2016, most people didn't give a damn about the Electoral College.
Yeah.
Now everybody wants to talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we have to go back to the beginning. The beginning is that room on the second floor of Independence Hall in Philadelphia in 1787, where the guys who wrote the Constitution did their work.
Mm-hmm.
That's the Federal Convention.
Okay.
When they're deliberating, one of the first things they decide is we need one guy, one chief executive. Eventually they call him the president. But how do you choose him? One delegate, James Wilson of Pennsylvania, says, let the people decide. All the other delegates go nuts. This will never work. Why won't it work? Now, if we don't think about context, we think they're all anti-democratic, elitist, evil people who hate the people. But we have to listen to what they're saying. Elbridge Gerry says the people will not know who the candidates are. And if you think about it for 2 minutes, you realize that's right. You're dealing with a large, thinly populated, scattered country where most people do not travel 5 miles from their birthplace, and most people don't have sources of national news or national information. There are no national news magazines, no big newspapers, no internet, no Facebook, none of the vehicles whereby you might learn who the big shots are. So then there are two other methods that they're arguing about. Let Congress choose the president. Well, that's no good because he'll be under their thumb. Mm-hmm. Let the states choose the president. Well, that's kind of cumbersome. And again, he might be under their thumb. So over time, they recognize they need a system whereby the president is chosen by people under whose thumb he's not going to be. Mm-hmm. Somehow mixing the differing influences of state and national. And that's how you come up with the Electoral College. These people assemble once to deliberate and decide. They don't assemble all together. They assemble in their respective states' capitals. So the Electoral College never gets together all at once. Mm-hmm. So there's no chances for influence or corruption or conspiracy. And the electors cast their votes. Now, how do you choose these electors? Each state decides how they will choose their electors. Will their legislature choose the electors? Will the people choose the electors? There's a mix. Mm-hmm. Now, if you think about it, it makes good sense. The electors are people who are big shots. The 18th century term is men of refined and enlarged views. Mm-hmm. These are people who know the state of the country. They know the state of the prospective candidates for president, who might be a good choice. And if you allow the people to choose the big shots who choose the president, in essence, they know who the big shots in their state might be. Right. So they're choosing the people who have a good shot at choosing someone who's capable of doing the job.
Right.
And that's how it works. Now, in this case, in 1789, everybody knew who the guy was going to be. George Washington was the one man who was young enough and strong enough to handle the office, and who was known to everybody in the United States as someone who could be trusted with power. Because Washington passed up chance after chance to be like Oliver Cromwell, to sort of take over and become Lord Protector or King of America. George wasn't interested. Washington's elected. Second election comes along in 92. Again, Washington's elected unanimously. This time John Adams is also elected, but with a better vote than he got last time. The third election comes along. George says, I'm not doing this again. I'm retiring. I'm going home. Thereby establishing what lasts for 150 years as a 2-term limit on the presidency. By this point, a change has started to emerge that is really going to be a serious change in the Electoral College. Americans are dividing along partisan lines. They're not political parties the way we know them. I would call them partisan alliances, because people can move back and forth. There's no real penalty for doing that, but they are dividing into two roughly equal groups. Adams narrowly beats Thomas Jefferson. Adams is the chosen candidate of people who call themselves Federalists, people who favor power for the federal government. Jefferson is the chosen candidate of the Republicans. People insist that they and they only favor a Republican form of government, no kings, no nobles, no whatever. Adams becomes president, Jefferson becomes his vice president. In our terms today, this would be as if Donald Trump became president and Hillary Clinton became his vice president. The key thing is the emergence of these partisan rivalries, because over time, what you see is as the power of these partisan groups, which ultimately become political parties, rises, the power and discretion of the presidential electors falls. The thinking is more and more these electors should be bound to represent the party Eventually you start seeing states adopt laws known as faithless elector laws. These are laws that bind the electors chosen by majority vote to vote for that candidate or that pair of candidates. Another thing that happens that changes the Electoral College is the election of 1800. In the election of 1800, you have two clearly defined partisan alliances: Republicans backing Jefferson and his running mate Aaron Burr, and Federalists backing President John Adams and his running mate Charles C. Pinckney. Both sides agree that their candidates are bound to vote for their guys. But this is how the electoral vote turns out. 73 votes for Jefferson, 73 votes for Aaron Burr. They're tied. The Federalists come in second, in a way. 65 votes for John Adams, 64 votes for Charles C. Pinckney. But what do? You have to break that tie between Jefferson and Burr. What finally happens is, after 35 ballots in the House trying to choose between Jefferson and Burr, always ending up with tie votes, some Federalists say, okay, enough. We are going to abstain. We just won't cast votes. And therefore Jefferson will get a majority of the votes cast. And he'll become president, but we won't dirty our hands voting for him. And meanwhile, the question is, how do we fix the Electoral College so this does not happen again? That's the source of the 12th Amendment, which is proposed and adopted by the 1804 election. The 12th Amendment does one big thing. It separates the voting. The electors vote for a president and a vice president. So you don't have any ties anymore. It doesn't matter if the presidential candidate gets 73 and the vice president gets 73. That's all right. They're running for different offices. That gets rid of any repeat of 1800. And thus the vice presidential race, but separated from the presidential race, loses whatever influence it had over how the presidential race might come out. And thus the Electoral College is taking its modern shape. Governed by party, bound by party loyalty, and generally reflecting that the popular vote majority actually will be reflected by the candidate who gets the electoral vote majority. Only 4 times since 1824 has that not happened. 1876, there's a confusion between Republicans backing Rutherford Hayes and the Democrats backing Samuel Tilden. That's resolved by a special electoral commission that gives Hayes all the disputed electoral votes, even though Tilden had a majority of the popular vote. 1888, Benjamin Harrison scores an electoral vote majority, even though Grover Cleveland scores a popular vote majority. We fast forward over 100 years to 2000, where there's the brawl that goes all the way up through the court system to the Supreme Court. Who gets Florida? Whoever gets Florida gets the electoral vote majority. That's George W. Bush, even though Al Gore outpolls him by 100,000 votes. And then the most recent election, 2016, and this really shows something's gone horribly wrong, because Donald Trump scored an electoral vote majority, even though Hillary Clinton outpolled him by nearly 3 million votes. Now, if you want to know how big that is, in 1789, to the extent we can measure how many popular votes, that's about the number of votes that were cast in that presidential election. This is a gigantic gap. Yeah. And so a lot of people, myself included, think maybe this is showing the Electoral College is broken and either has to be fixed or replaced. Amending the Constitution is very hard. You need to define a constitutional problem, 1, a constitutional solution that fits the constitutional problem but doesn't have a lot of unintended consequences. That's 2. And 3, you need the political resources and political will to get through the process. To get through the process, you need to get a 2/3 vote in each House of Congress, House and Senate. That only proposes the amendment to the states. The states have to ratify 38 out of 50, 3/4 of the states, to add an amendment to the Constitution. What are the odds? We have 27 amendments to the Constitution. Mine. 27 amendments out of 40,000 proposed since 1789.
How many?
40,000.
40,000.
0.5% chance that an amendment proposed will get adopted. And there's another problem. There's a partisan problem. The Republicans benefited from the last 2 elections where a minority popular vote guy won the electoral vote. So do you think they're really going to change a system that gave them 2 presidential elections? No. And they control the House, they control the Senate, and they control a majority of the states. So you see that politically speaking, even absent this abstract what's the word I'm looking for? The abstract question of constitutional design, it's almost impossible that you're going to have an electoral college amendment.